Welcome everybody to this webinar, which is part of the International HRM webinar series. It's wonderful to see so many people attending today. The series is organized by the Simon Fraser University Center for Global Workforce Strategy, and we have Mila Lazarova and Edna Kwan from there. And a co-organizer is Penn State University Center for International HR Studies. And we have Maya Vidovich and Miguel Olives-Lujan. And we also have from ESCP Business School in Germany and in France, Marion Festing and Maral Muratbekova. So thank you to all of the co-organizers for putting all this together today. My name is Elaine Farndale. I'm the Center Director for the Center for International HR Studies at Penn State. So we established this International HRM webinar series as a result of the pandemic that stopped us all being able to go to conferences and workshops and things, because we wanted to make sure that people stayed connected with everything that was going on within international HRM and research and teaching. What ironically today and tomorrow would actually have been our global conference of international HRM taking place in New York City, which is now postponed till May next year. So put that one in your calendar. But instead we have an excellent keynote webinar for you today, as well as some of you are involved in a workshop that we're running tomorrow as well, a virtual workshop that allows us to keep our research going. With this webinar series, we have a YouTube channel, and that YouTube channel has the recordings of all the previous webinars. And this webinar will also appear on there. The recording will appear on the YouTube channel probably in a day or two after this recording today. So if you need to look at it again, if you want to share it with anybody, then yeah, please look at the YouTube channel. Information is appearing in the chat. Okay, so it is my great pleasure today to introduce our 9th webinar in the series. And this is presented by Professor Vlad Weiman from California Lutheran University in the USA. So Vlad is a professor and associate dean at the School of Management of California Lutheran University and is a visiting professor at several premier universities around the globe. He's published 5 books on managing talent in organizations, as well as a number of academic and practitioner-oriented articles and book chapters on talent management and international HRM. His work has appeared in journals such as Academy of Management, Learning and Education, Human Resource Management, International Journal of Human Resource Management, Human Resource Management Review, and the Journal of Business Ethics. Vlad is also a founding editor and the chief editorial consultant of the European Journal of International Management, and an editorial board member of several prestigious academic journals, such as European Management Review, Human Resource Management Review, and the Journal of Global Mobility. He is a founder, co-organizer, and a leading chair of the EIHRM workshop on talent management, and an editor of the Emerald book series on talent management. So on that theme of talent management, where Vlad is obviously a really strong expert, we are very pleased that Vlad is going to be speaking to us today on the topic of the rise of fluid work, latest developments and implications for talent management. We're going to start the presentation momentarily. If you have questions, please put those in the Q&A. We will monitor the Q&A, and when Vlad has finished his presentation in about 30-35 minutes, then we will go through the questions that have appeared in Q&A, and we have 15 minutes or so to go through those. So on that note, I will hand over to you, Vlad, and thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you, Elaine. Excuse me. Thank you, everybody. First of all, I would like to thank the Center for International Human Resource Management at Penn State, Simon Fraser University, ESCP Berlin, and namely Elaine Farndale, our gracious host, Mila Lazarova, manifesting, and their wonderful colleagues, Maral, Maya, Miguel, Edna, and others for inviting me to present. Yesterday, I turned 50, and I think this is a pretty good start for this new chapter in my life. So let's get to our today's topic, which is something that has attracted my attention only recently, to be honest. COVID-19 is not the first, but probably the most visible and profound example of environmental disruptions. Whether we want to admit it or not, similar disruptions may be awaiting us in the future, maybe even in the near future. You know, global pandemics, changing weather patterns that are happening or will be happening or may be happening due to climate change, and others that may bring more natural disasters around the world. All of these disruptions already have and will undoubtedly continue to cause a lot of changes in the way we live and the way we work. In this presentation, I would like to emphasize one interesting trend that we're able to see right now when it comes to workforce, talk about its characteristics, and identify a few opportunities for research in this area. Let me step back for a second though. As everyone knows, there are two major approaches that every research work is taken. The first one, in no particular order of importance, is the one that's aimed at advancing existing theories, making new theories also. But I think that in management studies, this approach makes sense only if the theories can make practical contributions sometime down the line. And the second one is the one that's based on a real-life managerial phenomenon. It should rely, this sort of research should rely on rigorous basic research and help managers in solving their problems. To be perfectly clear, I'm a strong proponent of the second approach, as I think the one of our major roles as management researchers is to assist practitioners who deal with these issues on a daily basis. One such potentially interesting real-life issue is the future of work. That's already here, by the way, and its implications on organizations in general and on talent management in particular. As an example that we're still experiencing, the current coronavirus crisis has rushed the arrival of the future of work. I have spoken to a number of senior executives, C-level executives in major international corporations lately. I'll come back to this a little bit later on. And they all talk about the future of work. They talk about the future of work as something that keeps them awake at night. That's something that, and something that really occupies all their thoughts when it comes to workforce management and talent management in particular. Also, according to World Economic Forum, lockdown has seen a proliferation of remote working on unprecedented scale, rapidly intensifying automation, as well as a global appreciation for the care economy, so-called care economy, that includes first responders and other essential employees, and a much higher reliance on freelance, or sometimes as we call it, gig workers. Right? We're coming closer and closer to the focus of this particular presentation. Coupled with these developments, there are others brought about by such forces as aging population. As we know, in 2015, 6 years ago, number of workers aged 40 and above has exceeded the number of those 14 below for the first time ever. And this trend is not going to subside. The aging population decreases talent availability, which in turn is also diminishing mobility of skilled labor. And some of these forces, some of these factors have been mentioned in the presentation by David Collins, by the way, a few weeks ago. I think that one of the most curious outcomes of all this and other developments is a visible increase in so-called fluid work. John Boudreau and his colleagues argue that work within an organization becomes more fluid when jobs are deconstructed and reinvented, permanent employees are offered inside gigs, and work is becoming highly automated. In addition to that, I argue organizational work boundaries become more fluid as well, since there are other types of workers, fluid workers, as we call them, representing an outside workforce that some organizations are now using more than ever before. And these workers are in our focus today. Let's have a look at this very short video, about 2 minutes long, and then continue.
Freelancing is now just a part of the American fabric. These are the new jobs. The nature of business itself has changed. Hi, I'm Sarah Horowitz. I'm the founder of the Freelancers Union. We have over 130,000 members. We've been growing at about 40% per year. We provide health insurance to over 22,000 members in New York. People, after they're laid off, they're not getting full-time jobs. They're freelancing or consulting. When people are graduating from college, they're not necessarily going into full-time jobs. They're freelancing. When people have children and want to balance their work and family life, they're freelancing. When you're a traditional employee, you get your assignment, you do your job. When you're a freelancer, you have to many times market yourself to get the job, conceptualize the job, implement the job, do the job, repeat over and over. Those are exactly the kinds of skills that are needed in this economy. 10:30. Okay, so we don't even know how many people work in this way because we're not counting it properly. The best number is the General Accounting Office, and it says that there are about a third of the workforce. Since the 1970s, work has become much shorter term. What this recession has done is it's really been the line in the sand. This is the new workforce. This isn't a blip that's going to then, we're going to return to something else. Because of technology, companies know and have so much more information so much faster that they don't need to have the same stockpiles of labor that they did in the 1930s, where you needed to always have a big workforce on hand. So companies want to be able to hire, bring on a team, and then move them along. It is shorter term, it's more flexible, it's faster. If this is going to be the new workforce, then we need to have an unemployment system that accounts for that. We need to make sure that people have the resources, the money that they need. They need to be able to earn a living. They need to be able to send their kids to college. Those are the goals. We now have to figure out, given that work is going to be so short term, how are we going to help people achieve those goals? Freelancing.
All right. So when do you think this video was made? I'm not really asking you to answer this question right now, but when I first looked at it, I was a bit amazed, especially judging by a BlackBerry in someone's hands when the narrator was talking about the latest technology. It could not have been from this year, right? And of course, you're correct. It is from 2010. Already back then, so it's about 11 years ago, they talked about freelancers as a growing phenomenon, which basically exploded in the past couple of years, facilitating proliferation of fluid workers. So again, this phenomenon is not new, but what is new is the scale to which it has become mainstream, to which it has become even more important than ever before. So these fluid workers include the following types of workers. Number one, again, no order of importance, freelancers and independent contractors. Those who usually supplement the company's own workforce and set their own hourly rates. Then gig workers, which is not apparently the same as freelancers, because it's type of freelance work, but that is mediated through an app or a platform. Like, for example, Fiverr. I know that a lot of you are using or have been using Fiverr before for small tasks. And this work is usually paid by the task. Next one is paid crowdsourced workers. Those employed to perform a partial assignment and get paid for a micro task, right? Which can then be put together to a whole task. Moonlighters. Professionals with a primary permanent job elsewhere, with a fluid job on the side, so to speak, right? Those who work multiple jobs, as I said, perhaps full-time and one fluid on the side. That is in accordance with research done by Capgemini. There are other fluid workers, excuse me, that we can include into this in this list. For example, workers who are borrowed from partners and volunteers. By the way, speaking of borrowed workers, the Kroger supermarket company here in the United States borrowed furloughed employees for 30 days from Cisco, which is a wholesale food distributor, just for 30 days to fill up, to plug a hole or to fill a gap in the company's needs. And all of them, as I said, can be referred to as fluid workforce. Interestingly enough, as I said before, the phenomenon is not new. And, recently in one of my exchanges with Mike Morley from University of Limerick, we kind of were able to figure out that the premise behind fluid workers is somewhat related to the notion of temporary organizations, which Mike and his colleagues identified as, let me read it, a temporary bounded group of interdependent organizational actors formed to complete a complex task. So this is a very interesting tangent here, I would say. And for more information on temporary organizations, please refer to Mike's work published, among others, in Human Relations. Unlike the regular workforce, fluid workers are not on organization's payroll. They're also temporary in terms of the nature of their contract. They're also enjoying, right? Either no or limited benefits. And their work is not as of yet, and I say as of yet because some work is being done by different governments around the world, regulated, as the laws and regulations are currently evolving and really varying very much from country to country. We'll touch upon those a little bit later on. Why do companies use fluid workforce? Well, organizations use a fluid workforce to address a specific need when it comes to 5 major factors. First of all, specialized skills. It's easier sometimes to find a skilled talent for a certain project or for a certain task than to develop this task, this knowledge, this skill on your own. It takes a long time, and especially in fast-paced industries, sometimes it just doesn't make any sense to develop people if you can use them as a fluid component into your organization. And this is really the fastest way to bridge skill gap in a company. Second reason is cost reduction, possible cost reduction. Experts calculated that savings could be in excess of 30% annually, since there are usually no benefits attached to fluid workers, no pensions to be paid, no office space required, usually no overhead in general. So it's about 20 to 30% just from using fluid workforce as opposed to full-time employees. Quality is number 3 factor. Usually fluid workers are specialized in a specific area of work and become true experts in that area, right? So the quality is increasing of work that needs to be done. Next factor is speed of doing one's work. With deep expertise usually comes agility, right? Comes both speed and quality. And of course, sometimes we don't have any empirical evidence to that yet, but sometimes organizations can use a fluid workforce for globalization purposes, because people, fluid workers, can help provide expertise in certain markets, new markets perhaps, to an organization without exposing the company to all those risks of going abroad, of international expansion. So those are 5 needs or 5 reasons why companies use or may use fluid workforce. Interestingly, ladies and gentlemen, that with the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, more and more companies utilize the talent of fluid workforce. Remember, we just talked about the 2010, and a lady said that there is no number. There are no real figures. Well, there are figures now. So more and more companies are using fluid workforce in addition to their permanent employees. By the way, even pre-COVID, nearly 80% of organizations surveyed by Capgemini worldwide in 2019, so it's worldwide in 2019, have used the fluid workforce in 2018. And as we just indicated previously, global pandemic has obviously accelerated the usage of fluid workers across organizations and also across national boundaries, which is also really important. Well, you can say, okay, this might be the case now during the pandemic. Perhaps things will go back to normal after this is all done and over with, right? That's the question you can ask. But I think that's highly unlikely. On the one hand, the global health crisis has only hastened the shift from traditional hierarchical organization to a more fluid ecosystems, if you will, driven by agility, adaptability, flexibility, and very important, a limited need for a physical location. McKinsey, in their future of work after COVID-19 research, estimated that up to 25%, listen to these numbers, 25% of the workforce in the developed world and about 10% in the developing world will continue work from home even after the pandemic. 25% in the developed and 10% in the developing world. Those are really big numbers. In addition, ladies and gentlemen, 87% of the companies worldwide, also according to McKinsey, estimate that they either are already experiencing talent gap or expect talent gaps within the next 5 years. And to address the talent gap, these organizations use a mix of actions. And the most popular mix is hiring more fluid workers and redeploying existing employees into new roles. Again, to plug those holes, to plug those skill gaps. We'll talk about how it's done usually in just a few minutes. So continuing, right? As I said before, let me just go back for a second. We said that on the one hand, global health crisis only hastened. We also said that 87% of the companies worldwide experience skill gaps, and they already using mix of actions such as hiring more fluid workers and redeploying existing workers. Also, the growth of freelance economy, as we could see right now, was already quite significant even before the pandemic, and it's likely to continue after it's over. It's on the one hand, right? On the other hand, an increasing proportion of the workforce, especially influenced by the influx of both millennials and Gen Zers into the workforce, prefer job roles that offer flexibility, variety, and fewer constraints. So it seems that here's where demand for fluid work meets supply, or at least is trying to meet supply. Again, fluid workforce, the notion of fluid workforce is not new, and researchers on freelancers and gig workers research has been done before. But what is new, again, I'm just trying to summarize this. What is new is that fluid workforce is now becoming mainstream, with about 80% of organizations surveyed by Capgemini have used it since 2019. US and Indian companies are leading the charge, with the public sector and banking using more fluid workers than any other sector of the economy. Let's have a look at a chart. As you can see here, India and US are ahead of everyone, but perhaps somewhat surprisingly, to me at least, and maybe you have better insights here, countries with strong labor protection laws like Germany, the Netherlands, Spain, and others are also demonstrating high numbers in terms of organizational organizations, using the fluid workforce, right? You can see the UK there, and Norway and France and Italy among the leaders in fluid workforce, or organizations using fluid workforce over 2019, 2020. Functionally speaking, IT, information technology, utilizes the most fluid workers, about 17% of its overall workforce in that function. And this is closely followed by finance and accounting, about 15%. Age-wise, which is interesting, but not surprising, I would say, 50% of fluid workers are between 18 and 35 years of age, and 20% are between 36 and 40. So 70%, excuse me, over 70% of all fluid workers are under the age of 40, which is not insignificant, I would say, which is not insignificant. So as you can see on this chart, some of these figures demonstrating sectoral division can be seen here on this chart. Public sector, banking, consumer products, insurance, other financials, etc., etc. So, I think that fluid work is here to stay. 73% of organizations surveyed in 2020, last year, believe that they will be using more workforce, more fluid workforce in the next 12 months. And around 70% agree that the current crisis, coronavirus crisis, will lead them to hire more fluid workers in the future, well beyond the pandemic, well beyond the pandemic. This is whatever we just talked about before, was from the employer's perspective, right? If you look from the worker's perspective, especially among highly skilled employees, right, you will see that there are top 3 reasons for choosing a fluid work or fluid job, if you will, over a permanent one. And these reasons are ability to choose roles as they please, flexibility in choosing place and timing of work, and flexibility in choosing the overall duration of work. And again, think about those highly skilled employees. Most of them apparently are between the ages of 18 and 40. So this, again, this is something that deserves our attention as scholars and managerial practitioners. Some more numbers for you. 69% of skilled workers, of highly skilled workers, feel that they add more value by being part of a fluid workforce than being a full-time employee. 68% excited about their day-to-day work, being a fluid worker. And 67% look forward to being in work every day. Again, being a fluid worker. This really means that from both employer and worker perspectives, fluid work is really here to stay. So have I convinced you yet? Let's now see what it all means, both researchers and practitioners. We've seen some recent calls for more empirical evidence on managing talent in non-traditional work arrangements. And I'm citing here our recent special issue of Human Resource Management and the Shifting Boundaries of Talent Management. If you read it, or if you will read it, you will see that there were some calls for paying more attention to non-traditional work arrangements. In addition, ladies and gentlemen, the emergence, I should say, and rapid expansion of the fluid workforce, and the fact that they're most likely here to stay for the foreseeable future, will pose new challenges to organizations, anywhere from information security to intellectual property rights, to efforts to manage talent. And as we just saw, fluid workers specifically have the potential to offer considerable value to their temporary organizations and should be part of their talent management programs, especially those that we just mentioned, those who are highly skilled, highly talented, highly knowledgeable workers. So I think that there are some important questions that organizations will have to ask themselves when it comes to talent management, such as, for example, questions on how For example, they can effectively attract and retain freelance and contract workers at the same time as recruiting permanent staff. At the same time, not just instead of, but at the same time. I think that could be an interesting question or interesting area to explore. Another one would be, what are the challenges of performance metrics and benefits? And that lady on the video actually talked about that as well. For employees or workers who do not work for the company full-time or even exclusively. Another key question here, I think, is how to provide valuable employee experience to both permanent employees and fluid workers. And I think the following factors have to be considered here when it comes to talent management. Engagement, right? Which perhaps can be achieved by offering interesting and challenging assignments to fluid workers. Career growth, important to both actually, full-time employees and fluid workers, not career in terms of climbing the ladder, corporate ladders, but in terms of development, personal and professional development through development and learning opportunities that organizations can offer. Performance management, another important topic, how to measure it for fluid workers, how to communicate it, how to monitor goals. Retention issues are always important. And speaking of retention issues, my friends, it's notoriously difficult to retain fluid workers. Sometimes it is by design, I have to admit, especially when it comes to low-skilled labor. For example, Amazon's turnover rate among frontline workers was around 111%, 111% in September of 2020. So they had to rely on fluid workers to plug the holes, really. They had 175,000 temporary workers last spring and ultimately offered permanent positions to 125,000 of them. So clear majority. The turnover rate since then has decreased somewhat, but there are no specific steps by the company to reduce it, even down to industry average. When it comes to highly skilled fluid workers, retention is difficult because most of them prefer to stay as flexible as possible for as long as it makes sense to them, right? All these issues have to be addressed in a timely manner. First and foremost, because managing talent of fluid workers is an important undertaking. First, as I said, the number of fluid workers will only increase in the future. Excuse me, I need to take a sip of my coffee. Besides statistics mentioned above, according to Microsoft's 2021 Work Trend Index report, and listen to these numbers, 41% of the global workforce is likely to consider leaving their current employer within the next year. 41% of the global workforce. It goes to 54%, this number goes to 54% when it comes to younger employees, right, below the age of 40. The number is significantly higher than 30% that indicated the same willingness both in 2019 and 2020. At the same time, ladies and gentlemen, 46% in 2021, 46% are planning to make a major pivot or career transition. Some of these employees will find their place in that fluid workforce. I guarantee you. However, most organizations are not set up to cater to the needs of fluid workers. Whether it comes as a surprise or not, they're not set up this way. As most organizations' efforts to recruit, onboard, develop, manage performance, and retain employees are aimed at full-time workers, full-time employees, as opposed to fluid workforce. Also, apparently, there's not much effort to make sure that fluid workers get familiarized with the company's culture, values, and traditions. And finally, most managers are not simply trained on how to deal with fluid workers and manage them effectively. Less than half of organizations surveyed by Capgemini have a highly developed approach to manage talent of their fluid workers. Less than 50% of organizations. Most of them don't know how to do it. So what can companies do? What can they do in theory? Well, they can formulate an integrated talent strategy that would include fluid workers, most likely with the help of people analytics. They can also establish a clear process for managing and developing a fluid workforce, train and deploy dedicated talent managers to do that. Build a robust organizational culture that supports the growth of fluid workforce, right? And those are all nice suggestions. Don't get me wrong, nice suggestions, but they're quite general and vague in nature. Here's what here's what some organizations actually do better, or let me rephrase that. They actually do to better manage talent of fluid workers. I have, as I mentioned before, have interviewed a number of CHROs, Chief Human Resource Officers, representing major international corporations with the headquarters here in Southern California. And here's what they note. They do actually realize that there will be constant influx and outflux of talent within their organization, given that people don't have to leave their desks now really to change their jobs anymore. They also understand that they need to hire more diverse talent around the world, and they're already doing it, exercising extreme, as they call it, extreme flexibility, both in terms of policies, HR policies, and work arrangements. They also see potential talent in all types of fluid workers they use. One good example would be a large international restaurant chain. I'm not going to name it, but interestingly enough, they're using Uber Eats drivers to distribute food from the restaurant directly to clients, and also at the same time to source individuals from Uber Eats with superior customer service skills to potentially join the company full-time, but in a different capacity. So that's what they do. What else they do? Organizations also use fluid assignments in their talent recruiting approach. One executive told me, try before you buy, something that they exercise on a daily basis. For example, a major international nutrition company, again, no name will be divulged, is creating project teams that students can apply to as independent contractors. And if chosen, complete a certain project within the time and budget allocated. While at the same time, organizations are following, or this organization is following their every move, trying to evaluate those with high potential, who will then subsequently, hopefully, become a recruitment target for full-time positions. Some organizations also utilize fluid workers as a source of specialized expertise, or sometimes they call it rare expertise and quality. For instance, a few major biopharmaceutical companies started using some freelance vaccine specialists to ramp up their vaccine development efforts at the beginning of the pandemic. Since most messenger RNA experts, you know that mRNA experts are not feasible to pursue for full-time employment, at the moment at least, due to their current employment status or cost considerations, using them as fluid workers made more sense to these organizations, and they have been successful in actually retaining them throughout the pandemic. Unfortunately, as we noted before, most organizations approach management of fluid workers on an ad hoc basis, which they now regret, by the way. The explanation for this approach is rather simple. There is so much work with their full-time employees now during the pandemic that there's simply not enough time to make more serious efforts when it comes to fluid workers. There are quite a few implications for talent management practitioners. So I'm looking at my watch, making sure that we are not running late. Talent management practitioners and scholars alike. Some research questions that I could recommend that we could explore, for example, could address the following issues. How to establish a clear process to manage and develop a fluid workforce, or how to establish an integrated talent management strategy that would incorporate both full-time and fluid workers. Or another one, how to accommodate an ever-growing demand for remote fluid jobs. By the way, according to ZipRecruiter, a US recruiting company, only 45% of job seekers indicated they prefer to find a permanent job. Only 45%. There are other possible questions, like with the influx of fluid workers, will corporate cultures erode over time, especially without physical interaction? Or how to build a culture that supports the growth of fluid workforce? Or will the quality of human capital in a company be impaired given the decrease in a face-to-face collaboration? And many questions like this could be generated and explored, because I think it's a very interesting and potentially lucrative path. Another set of questions can be brought about by the issue of location. And this is something that practitioners actually pointed me to. Do we bring people to work or work to people? And how do we reclassify the roles by employee segments? For example, remote only, hybrid, on-site, fluid, etc. And I think it's a huge topic on its own, by the way. Another one is this: do we resize our physical footprint while maintaining quality of our workforce, including its fluid component? Google, as you know, has announced the continuation of remote work until June of this year, but is still investing heavily in facilities. Goldman Sachs, by the way, is rejecting remote work completely and will be returning full-time on location as soon as possible. So there are different considerations. I have just a few slides left so that we will have about 10 minutes for questions and answers. There are also quite a few implications, I think, for macro talent management. First, the reduction of the office footprint in the long run may lead to possible stagnation and ultimate decline of the cities which used to be a talent magnet. That's because those cities, having spent enormous amounts of money on fighting the pandemic, are now facing really decreasing tax revenues from the office sector, which in turn leads to cuts to city services and infrastructure, which in turn will make the cities less attractive to potential talent, especially high-skilled talent. According to Moody, commercial real estate values are projected to decline by 12.6% this year, with unused office space, for example, in San Francisco, nearing 75%. 75%. Second, the rapid rise of fluid work will encourage the establishment of new digital platforms that will, in turn, support the rise of fluid work. So it's like a continuous loop. There should be a word of caution, though. I think we can all agree that technology has enhanced efficiency and other benefits that we mentioned before, but that is the case mostly in so-called developed world. When it comes to developing world, it has also disrupted livelihoods, especially those of young people. A large-scale survey of 12,000 young people across 112 countries in May 2020, conducted by the International Labour Organization, found that 17% of previously employed youth, those between the ages of 18 and 29, stopped working when the pandemic hit, and 42% reported a sizable drop in income. Most of these unemployed people entered the world of fluid work, increasing supply of fluid workers, especially in the low-skilled labor side, and thereby exerting downward pressure on wages and working conditions. Besides, and it's, I think, also very important, with the proliferation of fluid work, the organizations must be less inclined, might be, I should say, not must be, but might be less inclined to build and maintain permanent workforce, relying instead of fluid workers, including those in low-skilled and therefore low-paid jobs. And this is something that we need to really follow and observe. One second. Yeah, so I said reduction in the office footprint, challenges in the developing world. Third, education. Society, I think our societies should be working on creating robust educational institutions, perhaps on the basis of already existing or specialized institutions of higher education, to assist workers make those mid-career transitions from a full-time employee to so-called company of one, and some experts call it micro-entrepreneurship. The shift in education should probably start earlier, I think, from middle school and high school curricula. As cognitive abilities and digital machines improve, perhaps students, let me just express almost a criminal thought right now, perhaps students should study less STEM subjects and more of entrepreneurship, honing their critical skills and design skills, design thinking skills, and perhaps creativity and similar skills. And finally, labor regulations should be changed as well, as they were built with full-time employees in mind to accommodate for fluid workers and address their safety net issues, right? Speaking of social justice. And this is another huge topic on its own. All these changes, either current or future, will undoubtedly change the way organizations manage their talent, be it full-time or fluid. And lastly, ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, it's important to mention that this pandemic, besides bringing total economic devastation, human tragedy to the entire world, has given us a chance to rebuild our economies in a better and more sustainable way. When it comes to the workforce, the World Economic Forum has identified an opportunity to build back better in 5 areas, as you can see them on your slide: reskilling and upskilling workforce, supporting the jobs of tomorrow, prioritizing redeployment and reemployment, reevaluating education, skills, and job systems for the post-pandemic recovery. And I think that talent management, including talent management of fluid workers, has a significant role in that effort. Here are some references used in this presentation. And once again, thank you very much for your attention. Here's my email if you would want to write to me. But right now, again, thank you very much, and I'm open for questions.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Vlad. If you want to stop sharing your screen and we can do the Q&A. That's excellent presentation. And I have a whole host of questions that you have about 8 minutes to go through. So it's
I apologize.
And you touched on so many topics that there's a complete range of ideas and things that have been flowing. So let me start with, there were 2 questions that are different but related in some way. So Naveen Said asked, how does this fluid workers classification build on Capelli and Keller's work of classifying employment relationships? And then Konstantinos Tesoulis asked, how far have we gone from Atkinson's model of the flexible firm to fluid work? And what are the main differences you see between these concepts? So relating to these kind of more traditional ways of thinking about things, what thoughts do you have on that?
You know what's interesting? I would like to look at it, first of all, independently. Because again, if we start building on theories and trying to fit what we know now into one or another theory, we're going to get stuck. That's what I'm thinking personally. Right now, I would like to look at this phenomenon with a completely fresh look, and only then try to find a basis, right, for exploring it further. So at this point, I would prefer, since also it's recent, I haven't written anything on fluid workforce yet. At this point, I prefer to look at it again with a fresh pair of eyes before tying it up either to Capelli's or to other frameworks, if that answers your question.
Okay, thank you. With a global perspective then, a question from Benjamin Blake. In terms of global employees, what does this mean for alternatives to the classic expatriate model? Are we likely to see more use of inpatriation, international business travelers, etc.? And are these alternative models considered fluid/flexible talent?
Not yet. I haven't heard of any development in this area, to be honest with you. But I think that would probably play a big role in expatriation in general. Again, speaking from the experience of my interviews with senior executives, they are telling me that they're going to be relying less. And again, this is a relatively small sample, but nevertheless, I think important. They will be relying less on expatriation in its classical form and more on fluid workers, no matter where they're located. So the classical view on expatriates versus impatriates versus third country specialist is going to be a bit obsolete, I think, in the near future. Again, this is just my prediction. I have no real outlook on this, but this is what I feel is going to happen.
Which makes sense, given the people that you're talking with. I'm sure that's a great insight. The next question comes from Khadija Al-Akubi, and they'd like to know, what would be the implications for knowledge fluid workers in terms of career development, global mobility, motivation, and sense of professional identity?
Implications from the company's perspective or from their own perspective, right? That's the question. From an organizational perspective, I think that's going to be, again, it's going to be a difficult task to manage knowledge of those fluid workers because, again, there's no loyalty, right, inbuilt into this relationship, and knowledge sharing is going to be difficult. Knowledge dissemination and other knowledge management components there. But from a personal perspective, I think that's what fluid workers, especially highly skilled fluid workers, are going for portable careers. And they want to make sure that they are working where they're needed, where they think they can apply their skills, and where they think their knowledge may be used to the highest extent. And I think there are multiple implications for both organizations and individuals. But again, speaking of, because this is my perspective, from organizational perspective, I think it's the companies have their work cut out for them in managing knowledge of those fluid workers. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. And just going back to one of the questions, there's been like a follow-up question, and this one comes from Michelle Hermans, saying recent years have witnessed much debate on the size of the gig workforce, with some sources such as McKinsey suggesting strong growth and the US Bureau of Labor Statistics suggesting that the number of people who rely on gig work as their main occupation has actually declined. And would you consider people who are employed in stable employment arrangements, who have a side job or side hustle, members of this fluid workforce as well?
Yeah, moonlighters. Sure. And you know what's interesting, again, at least looking here in the US, you will see that people are less and less looking for full-time steady jobs. I'm not saying that it's prevalent for everyone, of course, but when it comes to highly skilled professions, people just don't feel like being tied up with different policies, procedures, and not even physical location, but by corporate entity. They don't want to be tied up by that corporate entity. And the pandemic has intensified these feelings, especially among healthcare professionals and the researchers who do their work in the area of immunology and virusology and things like that. It's a very interesting development.
Great, thank you. So you mentioned a little bit when we were talking about knowledge workers, it's a challenge for the organization, it's a challenge for the individuals. One of the questions then raises the issue about what about HR? So Rhea Pruska says most organizations are not set up to cater for the needs of fluid workers. That was quoted from your presentation. Mm-hmm. So how does HR's role need to change to cater for this rise in fluid workers?
Well, I think HR managers need to be trained. First of all, how to deal with fluid workforce, first of all, but they cannot do it. They cannot do anything until there's certain legislation. Here in California, I guess we are ahead of everybody, but California is doing the opposite job. Actually, they are trying to prevent people from joining fluid workforce, because if they work for you, doing using your equipment or following your rules, as an organization, it means that they have to be classified as your employees as opposed to freelancers, and HR has to follow that. But I think before we train HR, we need to look into a macro environment and see how that changes or will change in order to accommodate for changes in the fluid workforce arrangements. But definitely, if you just forget about macro stuff and think about HR has to be trained, and it has to be mandate also given by top administration or top management of the company, because without their support, talent management doesn't work, be it for full-time employees or for fluid workers.
Thank you. We're running short on time, so I apologize if I don't get through all of your questions that are out there. But there's been a couple of questions around the idea of brain drain and brain gain that I'd like to raise. So Yelena Pukimika has asked, how might fluid work relate to brain drain, brain gain, brain circulation? And then they commented that later on you said something about magnet cities potentially experiencing brain drain, but I wonder if you can speak a little bit more to that piece.
Interesting. I think, again, it's a problem for those cities, obviously, right? But for work, again, looking from deeper perspectives, from workers, it's not really a big deal. And for some organizations, it's really not a big deal, because brain drain is when you move from point A to point B, where from organization in point A to point B, where the organization doesn't exist, and basically you left that organization or you left the country altogether. Now it doesn't really matter where you are, right? Physical location does not really identify who you are. It doesn't identify what you do and where you do things. So I think, again, with proliferation of fluid work, the concepts of brain drain and brain gain may become somewhat obsolete.
Okay, thank you, Vlad. I'm afraid I'm going to have to end the questioning at that point because we are just about out of time. But we'll be assured that we are going to make sure that Vlad receives all of the questions, which I'm sure will help inform the thinking around this area. So thanks to all of the participants for raising such great questions, and thanks very much, Vlad, to you for your presentation and for answering all the questions so thoroughly. So very insightful and definitely food for thought for us moving forward with our research. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Just before we actually close here, I just want to mention that we do have another webinar lined up already, and we will enjoy the presence of Professor Paula Caligiuri on June the 24th. So put that in your calendar. Information and I think a sign-up link has just gone in the chat if you want to click on that already. So Paula is from Northeastern University, and she will be speaking on how to build cultural agility. And the other point is that, of course, you can always find our recordings of all the webinars on the YouTube channel. If you subscribe there, then you'll get notifications when new things are put on there. And yeah, please do keep subscribing and watching our videos there. So all that remains for me to do now is to close our workshop, say thank you very much, bottom of my heart, to Vlad Weiman for agreeing to do this and for giving such a great presentation. Thanks to all of the co-organizers, as always, for all their help in putting everything together, and to all of you for attending today. So thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing everybody again in about a month from now. So thank you. Goodbye.